To today's webinar, Demystifying the Conveyancing Process by STL. My name is Bronwyn Townsend and I am part of the marketing team here at InfoTrack. I'm delighted to be joined today by Jackie Thorogood from STL. Jackie's been with STL for 13 years and is well versed in providing educational and interesting webinars. Today's webinar will cover the conveyancing process from the first call of a client to the keys being handed over at the end. We anticipate the webinar will take around an hour, and if you have any questions during the session, please do type them in the box. So Jackie, many thanks for your time today. I'll now pass control over to you to begin the webinar.
Morning everybody, and thank you for joining us. Yeah, my name is Jackie Thorogood, as you've just heard, and I'm going to be talking to you today about the conveyancing process. So this is really aimed at people that are new to conveyancing, and hopefully it will help you understand the wider conveyancing process in a simple way. If you've got any questions, you can type them in as we go along, and I'll try and answer them for you, or obviously you can email at the end of the presentation. So what is conveyancing? It's the legal process of transferring land from one person to another. Now today we're mainly talking about the residential conveyancing process, but obviously conveyancing can deal with the sale of land and also commercial property, but let's stick with resi today. So what is land? So a simple explanation is from the sky above to the earth below, although actually in this country some mineral rights below a property are actually the Crown's. So for example, you've probably heard a lot about fracking and the extraction of shale gas recently. That shale gas, even if it was below your property, would belong to the Crown. But really it's the buildings and land or anything attached to the buildings, and it's also intangible rights attached to land, so what we call an easement. An example of that would be something like a right-of-way over a driveway, or maybe the right to enter your neighbour's property to repair your fences. So there are two types of land. There's registered and unregistered. So registered land is where your property or your land is registered with the land registry. So there's been compulsory land registration since 1990, so it's not that long ago really, 27 years ago, and that's when the whole of England and Wales came under compulsory registration. So there's still about 20% of land and property in England and Wales that isn't registered because no transactions affecting that property or land have led to it being compulsory registered. So 20% or so of land is unregistered. Once that unregistered property gets sold, then it would go onto the land registry and become registered. So one thing that it's good to know about unregistered land is that you would need the original deeds to sell that property. So if you have a registered property, then the information is held at land registry, and the information you can see there on the left-hand side on the official copy of Register of Title. That's also known as an OC1 or an office copy. And that's really the copy of the deeds to the property, which confirms the description. You can see there that it's a freehold property, for example. It also confirms who owns the property, so you can see the names of the owners there. And this particular property down at the bottom, there's a mortgage via Santander. So that's the information that's held on the official copy, and it will also come with a title plan or a file plan that outlines the boundary of that property. So who's involved in conveyancing? First of all, we have the seller, also known as the vendor or transferee. And then we have the buyer, which you may know as the purchaser. sorry, I've got a bit of a sensitive mouse here. And then the mortgage lender, which is the mortgagee, the landlord, and the conveyancer. So they're the people that are involved, and we're going to be looking at all of those, all their roles in the conveyancing process in a bit more detail. So who can actually do conveyancing? Well, in fact, anybody can do conveyancing if there's no mortgage lender involved. So you could go down to WH Smith and get yourself a conveyancing pack and do that yourself. Obviously, you don't want to be making any mistakes and find out eventually that you don't actually own the property that you thought you did. So most people will use a solicitor or a licensed conveyancer. Now, a solicitor is regulated by the Solicitors Regulation Authority, the SRA, and the trade body is the Law Society. The licensed conveyancers regulator is the Council for Licensed Conveyancers, the CLC, and the trade body is the Society for Licensed Conveyancers. Legal executives could also be part of the conveyancing process and do the conveyancing, and their regulator is ILEX. The trade body is the Chartered Institute of Legal Executives. And you also have conveyancing managers who generally are unqualified professionals working for a firm of solicitors or licensed conveyancers who have experience to act in this capacity. Now, the next slide looks very busy, but we're going to be breaking this down over the course of the next 45 minutes or so. So this is the complete conveyancing process. So you can see the first 6 stages there and the last 3 there. So what we want to do is just break those down and try and simplify it and talk about each stage. So let's have a look at stage 1. So stage 1 is where your buyer makes an offer via an estate agent and the offer is accepted. So the estate agent will then confirm that offer with the buyer and the seller, and the solicitors will get involved, and there also needs to be an EPC at this point. So appointing a conveyancer. Obviously, it's down to the buyer to appoint their conveyancer and the seller to appoint one on their side. There can't be any conflict of interest. The same conveyancer can't act for both parties. But who does the conveyancer act for? Well, for the buying client, a conveyancer will act both for their client, and it's all about the intended use and enjoyment of that client's home. And then for the lender client, they'll also be acting if there's a mortgage involved, and the lender wants to know that there's good and marketable title. So there's a copy of the EPC. So this is normally attached to the sales particulars that the estate agent gives out when the property is on the market. And an EPC is really a guide that you get when you're looking at a property, and it shows how efficiently a home uses energy and the cost of running a home, and any recommendations of how to improve the energy efficiency of the property. So that's been law since 2008, and a certificate would be valid for 10 years. So let's have a look. That was stage 1. Let's have a look at stage 2. Try and get that coming in now. So first of all, the buyer is obviously instructing their solicitor. We've talked about that. Now they need to provide original ID documents, so a copy of a passport or a driving license. They normally need to pay for searches up front, and they need to show proof of where the deposit is coming from, and to sign the conveyancer's terms of business. The seller then instructs their solicitor. Again, the ID is important, and there's various forms that we're going to talk about that the seller needs to complete for the conveyancer. So the buyer's conveyancer will request the draft contract pack and verify the buyer via AML. And again, the seller's conveyancer also needs to verify their client with an AML search. and carry out a K16 Bankruptcy Search. So let's just have a look at those in a bit more detail. So solicitors will do checks on the buyer and the seller, as I've just said. So what is AML? It's an anti-money laundering search, and it's under the regulations of 2007 that says you need to verify the identity of all clients as part of the customer due diligence process. Failure to comply poses many risks, and that can actually include criminal and disciplinary sanctions. And it's something that you obviously get audited on as part of the due diligence process. So what does an AML search do? It verifies the identity of the client. It uses a comprehensive range of independent data sources. You will get a pass or refer result, and the result, it comes back in seconds. So this is something that the InfoTrack system has an integrated AML solution, and the result will come straight back to you. You actually have the ability as a firm to set the criteria for how many address or identity fields and data sources you want to see to make it either a pass or a refer. And then you have an online audit trail that lasts for 6 years. And the solution that InfoTrack offer is a pay-as-you-go solution. So there's no registration fees or minimum volumes. You just pay for the search up front. There's a copy of the AML search that you'd receive back, so you can see this one is a passed search, and you can see in red there that there's some data that's less than a year old, so any warnings would come up in red. Obviously, if that was a fail, then you need to make further inquiries to that particular individual. The K16 Bankruptcy Search is shown there. So K16 is actually the name of the form at the Land Registry that you request the search on, and then it comes back as a K17. And that should be done at the beginning of the sale. This is the seller's conveyancing doing this. And it also is done prior to exchange on a purchase if there is no mortgage involved. And this is obviously telling you whether a client is bankrupt. So let's move on to the legal pack. We saw earlier a copy of the deeds and the office copies, and these are the other forms that are involved in that legal pack. Let's look at those in a bit more detail. This is the TA6 form. So this is given from the seller's conveyancer to the seller to complete. Lots of interesting things in there about boundaries. Does the seller know if the property has ever flooded? What guarantees and warranties do you have? An interesting one that's been in the media a lot lately is the property affected by Japanese knotweed? There's information there about leasehold and all sorts of things on the TA6 form. So that's something that the seller completes. They'll also complete the TA10 form, which is the fixtures and fittings, and that's very much about what's included in the sale of the purchase of the property and what is excluded, and if there's any price attached to them. There's also a TA7 form for a leasehold property, and that's information about the lease to fill in. So lots of information at this stage for the seller to complete. So the conveyancers are then confirming instructions to each other's solicitor. Now at this point it's important that the conveyancers know that the conveyancer on the other side is genuine, and something that they might need to do is a lawyer checker. So we'll have a look at that in a moment. At the same time, the buyer is instructing a mortgage valuation with the lender if there's a lender involved. The seller conveyancer is issuing the draft contract pack, which is then received by the buyer's conveyancer. So why do we need a fraud check at this point? So you can see some stats there. 1 in 300 transactions experience mortgage fraud. The SRA think there's over 700 bogus law firms now, and 70% of all PI claims relate to conveyancing transactions. So huge figures there. So what's Lawyer Checker? It's an online service. Again, it's something that you can order directly from InfoTrack, and it's information about the conveyancer to whom you're sending the money. So it's really mostly important for the buyer's client, because they'll be transferring money across to the seller's conveyancer, and they need to know that that seller's conveyancer is genuine. Now, obviously, you can look at the SRA website, the Find a Lawyer site, and hope that the firm is registered on there, but there have been instances and case studies where firms that are registered have been bogus firms. So just to back up that check, you may want to do the Lawyer Checker, and that shows you the frequency of use of the client account number. So you can see an example there where the result is frequent, and you get that as an immediate response. It's checking the client account details against an historical database of previous transactions. So it's a very comprehensive database, and it checks to verify those entries. It'll also recommend, if it's shown to be infrequent, then it will recommend any other manual searches, but it really enhances your due diligence. So once we've completed all of those forms, the seller's completed them all, and the seller's conveyancer pass across the draft contract pack to the buyer's conveyancer. And that's just a copy of the initial page of the contract there. So what happens next? The buyer's conveyancer has to carry out all the investigations and raise inquiries based on the information that they've received. And at the same time, the buyer may want to instruct a survey. Why do we instruct a survey? Well, actually, a lot of transactions that go through just rely on a valuation report. And a lot of those valuations now are automated, or they're drive-by valuations, so nobody's actually going into the property. If you want somebody to go into the property, bearing in mind that it's probably the most expensive purchase that you'll ever make, you might benefit from some expert advice on the condition of that property. So yeah, I know it's something that I'd always do. And the home buyer report is the report that's completed by a surveyor and authorised in a particular format by the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, RICS. So it's really an in-depth inspection of the property, and you can see there's a traffic light system about any defects that are serious or might need repairing or replacing, or whether everything's green and okay. So it is the solicitor's responsibility to advise their client to get a survey on the property. What happens next in the process? Well, the buyer's conveyancer will then start ordering the property searches. So there's a number of different searches to order. The usual and required searches. So for the lender client, that is about, as I've said, ensuring there's good and marketable title. For the buyer client, that's to do with their intended use and enjoyment of the property. So once you've had a discussion with your client about their intended use and enjoyment, you'll then make a decision about which searches are necessary. And there'll be some optional searches there as well. So let's just have a quick look at the required searches. Although the CML and BSA handbook gives some guidance, they tend to just say that it's the searches that are usual searches and necessary searches. They don't definitely specify which searches they are. Most client, or most solicitor clients, will order the local authority search, so that's the one that you have to do, the drainage and water, and now as part of the pack, the environment search, because there was a warning card issued a number of years ago for contaminated land, and part 2 of the CML handbook says whether the lender wants to receive that environmental report, but there is a warning card saying that you should advise your client about any contaminated land. You may then want to do locality dependent searches, survey we've talked about, and any company searches. So let's just break those down for a few minutes, the usual and required searches. So firstly, there's the local authority search, which you'd either get a council search, also known as an official or a postal, or you'd get a personal search. If you get your personal search through STL and via InfoTrack, then that would be a regulated personal search, which is regulated via COPSO and the search code. And the local authority search, it is divided into 3 parts, which is the LLC1, the land charges. Now, interestingly now, the land charges is held at local authorities, but later this year there's a pilot scheme for that land charge information to be held at the land registry, and the intention there is to streamline the process and the cost of receiving the land charges information. So it will mean that councils no longer hold all the information they need to complete a local authority search. So whether that will still continue in all local authorities is yet to be seen. The other 2 parts to the local authority search are your Con 29, the standard inquiries, and then if you want any optional Part 2 inquiries, the Con 29.0, and that's what makes up the local authority search. If you order the local authority search, a regulated search through InfoTrack, this is what it looks like, and you do get the added benefit of a summary for conveyancers on that first page, which really pulls out the key entries in the search, so that you don't have to flick through the whole pack. You can look at the key entries and make some decisions there, and it'll also tell you which hazards have been identified with that property. And there's also the benefit at the back of the search with the information for buyers section, which explains in jargon-free terms, again, the key entries that are associated with that property. So i.e. what is a land charge, what is a smoke control order, and it explains that in jargon-free terms for your buying client to understand their search. Hopefully that saves you time in answering some questions. So the second required search is the drainage and water, which again can be a private regulated search or the official Con 29 water company search. And both of those will give you adoption of sewers, connection, surface water drainage, build over agreements, water supply, that sort of thing. Also things like, is there a public sewer running through the property? And the private drainage searches are good if you've got somebody who wants to reduce their cost and to use that in conjunction with the answers on the TA6 is what some solicitors go for. There's just a copy of the search there. You've then got some of your optional searches. So as I say, although environment is optional, that's normally part of a pack now. And the environment searches now have come on so much. It used to be, as I said, just for contaminated land, and that's what you'd get the certificate for, and a pass or a fail. Now the environment reports often include a full flood report, which includes river, coastal and surface water flooding, as well as things like ground stability and also energy there as well. So HS2, wind farms, solar panels, so you can get quite a comprehensive report. You may also want to do a planning report. So if your client has bought a property specifically for a view over the Thames, you don't want a 25 block of flats going up in front of you. So what's happening in the local area? And then things like mining, is the property in a coal mining, tin mining, gypsum mining area, all that sort of thing. And energy and infrastructure is the other one that I've just mentioned, either a separate report or as part of an environment report that includes things like Crossrail, HS2, wind farms. So there you can see a copy of the home buyers report. That's a ground shore report. Again, that can be ordered through InfoTrack, and you can see there that that's passed for contaminated land, but it also gives you extra information on the flood, energy, and ground subsidence. And there's a copy of a planning report there as well. So you decide which searches to order, and the InfoTrack system also has a tool which geocoded in the back end is all the hazards associated with a postcode or an address. So you put in the postcode or the address, and it will highlight any reports that or any risks that are associated with that property and give you a solution as to which reports to order. So that's a bit about the searches. Let's move on to the next part of the conveyancing process. Now this is quite busy, and basically there's quite a lot of going backwards and forwards between the buying conveyancer and the selling conveyancer on the contract. You'd also get the survey back at this time, and the buyer's conveyancer would look at that and maybe raise any additional inquiries. They may also look at the leasehold and the management information if it is a leasehold property. They'd look at the search results that have come back and again raise any additional inquiries on that if anything's shown on the search results. They may also at that stage order some of the ancillary products that we've shown there, so if any risks have been highlighted, and also the indemnity, the conveyancing indemnity policies could be ordered at this time. Again, all of those can be ordered through InfoTrack. So the seller's conveyancer would approve the transfer and get a signature to those. They'd also be replying to all the questions that the buyer's conveyancer is asking on the title about the management information. Obviously, the seller may have to provide copy documents and reply back to their solicitor. And then the buyer's conveyancer reports all that information back to the buyer. So there's a bit going back and forwards between the different parties here, and this is often where the transaction is held up. The buyer's conveyancer would then get the mortgage offer from the lender, and they'd report that back to the buyer, and the buyer then confirms that they're ready and they're happy to proceed and sign and return the contract. So the contract is then held by both sets of solicitors, all held on file, and then it's time to transfer the funds. So the funds come from the buyer's solicitor, so we need to pay a deposit, which is normally 10%, and that's transferred over to the buyer's conveyancer. At this stage, another K16 Bankruptcy Search may be carried out if there's no mortgage, and we looked at an example of that earlier. So now we're getting somewhere, and stage 7 of the process, the draft statement of account goes to the clients, and finally a completion date is agreed, and then we exchange contracts. So what do we mean by exchanging contracts? Well, that's a physical exchange between the buyer and seller's conveyancer of their client's signed contracts. And at the moment, that's normally via post or DX. But obviously, we're hoping to speed up the whole conveyancing process, and with things like electronic signatures coming into play in the near future, this could be done online. So the actual exchange is completed by the buyer's and seller's conveyancer over the telephone, and the contracts, as I say, at the moment, are posted on the same day. So there's a non-refundable deposit which is paid, which is now legally binding, and they'd lose the buyer would lose that deposit if they change their mind or they're unable to complete. So the deposit is normally 10%, but if, say, a lower deposit has been paid, only 5%, and then the buyer does pull out, they would still be legally obliged to pay the other 5%, so the 10% in total. So what happens next? the various solicitors are finalising the statement of account, so who owes who what. They'd be lodging the OS1 and OS2 priority search, which is a land registry document, which we'll have a look at. They'll get the mortgage advance from the lender and send over the purchase money to the seller's conveyancer. And they'd also do the submission to HMRC for stamp duty land tax. Now again, this is something that the InfoTrack system offers, so you can do it all in one place and actually do your SDLT submission via InfoTrack. You then confirm, the solicitors will confirm formal completion and release the keys. So I just gave some information there about the OS1 and the OS2 search. So if you're buying the whole of the registered property, so as opposed, for example, to just buying a new plot, then you'd need an OS1 search. If you're buying part of a title, so if you're just buying a plot, then it would be an OS2 search. And as you can see, these are the land registry documents there with the details. So where have we got? Finally, we're handing over the keys. So you can see the keys have gone to the seller, to the buyer, who now legally own that property and can move in. But the process obviously doesn't stop at that point. It carries on if you're a conveyancer. So what do we need to do? So the seller's conveyancer then has to redeem the mortgage. They have to pay the estate agent any of their fees, and they have to pay the balance to the seller. So there's a lot of paperwork involved there still. They have to sign the transfer and the title deeds and send all the documents to the buyer's solicitor. The buyer's conveyancer obviously is receiving those documents and the title deeds. And then they make an application to Land Registry to register the purchase. And that has to be done within the priority period as shown on the OS1 or the OS2 that we've just seen. They receive the completed title information document and send the title deeds to the buyer. And there you can see the buyers receive the completed title information. Now, this is interesting with the deeds because it used to be the lender that kept the deeds, and lenders now have all their own requirements, and they're shown in the CML Handbook Part 2, and the lender will show which documents they want on completion. But the main lenders don't want anything these days because of storage costs. Some solicitors will store for their clients the deeds, but again, it comes down to the storage costs. So generally, the majority of deeds go to the client for safekeeping. But obviously, the client does have to make sure that they do keep their copies safe and they've got the deeds for when they want to sell that property in the future. And as far as the deeds go these days, the main one is the title register. Since going electronic, you only get a couple of A4 pages of that, whereas you used to get a big impressive looking land or charge certificate. So unfortunately, it can be quite easy to lose. And also the other important things for the homeowner to keep are the originals of items, things like the indemnity, insurance that you may have ordered, policies, any certificates for gas and other installations, that kind of thing. So finally, all the paperwork has been done. What a lot of conveyancers do now, and we think is a good idea, is get their client to register for the free fraud protection service with the Land Registry. And that is, we've talked about fraud being on the increase, property fraud no exception to that. So by registering for this free service, the homeowners are notified when certain applications affecting the property, such as a new mortgage or a change of ownership occur. So if somebody is trying to do something fraudulent on your property, you'll get an alert about that. And you can actually register up to 10 properties in England and Wales, and owning the home isn't a stipulation. So you could register for properties for elderly relatives, or if you have buy-to-let properties, you could register for those as well. So that is really I don't think we've got any questions yet. If anybody's got any questions and would like to type those in, then I should be hanging around here. But hopefully that sums up the conveyancing process in a few simple steps. And my understanding is that the slides will be coming out to you following this webinar. So it'd be great to get some feedback just to see what you thought of the process, and I'll hand you back to Bronwyn now.
Thank you, Jackie, for your very informative presentation today. Now, if you're using InfoTrack, we do provide the searches shown today, and if you'd like any added to your pack, please let your account manager know. I'll be sending through the slides this afternoon, and if you require a certificate of attendance for your records, please let me know by return email. There will also be a short survey when you log out, and we'd really appreciate your input as it helps to define future contents of our webinars. Thank you for your time, everyone, and your feedback. I look forward to welcoming you to our next webinar.